Welcome to our deep dive
Okay.
into a tragic event in San Juan,
Yeah.
the death of Marcus Noel. We're going to be examining a really unique source for this one. A raw, emotional interview with Noel's girlfriend, Kimberly, conducted very shortly after the incident.
What makes this source so valuable is its immediacy. We're not, we're not looking at a polished news report or court documents. We're hearing directly from someone who was there, experiencing the shock and grief firsthand.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
So the basics are that Marcus Noel died after a fight with a man known as Bird escalated dramatically. Bird's brothers got involved,
Right.
and it ultimately led to Noel's death. But this deep dive isn't just about piecing together the facts of the case. It's about, understanding the human story behind the headlines and exploring the forces that might have led to this tragic outcome.
And the setting of the interview itself adds another layer of complexity. We're literally in Kimberly's home, the very place where the fight began.
Okay, so let's carefully walk through Kimberly's account.
Okay.
She starts by describing the initial fight between Marcus and Bird,
Right.
which apparently began with an argument about something as trivial as a bus ride.
It might seem insignificant, but these seemingly minor disagreements can often mask deeper tensions or resentments. The bus ride was just the tipping point, the catalyst for a conflict that was already brewing beneath the surface.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Kimberly mentions Bird being drunk
Uh-huh.
and possibly having taken pills.
Okay.
She even describes him picking on Marcus. How might alcohol and drugs have played a role in this situation?
Alcohol in particular is known to lower inhibitions and increase aggression, making individuals more likely to engage in impulsive and risky behaviors.
Right.
Certain drugs can have similar effects depending on the substance and the individual's predisposition. If Bird was indeed intoxicated, it could have significantly impaired his judgment and contributed to the escalation of violence.
It's chilling to think about how quickly things went from a disagreement to a life or death situation. Kimberly describes hearing Marcus cry out, "I get stabbed."
Oh, wow.
Her language is so raw, so visceral.
Yeah.
It really conveys the shock and terror of that moment.
The introduction of a weapon completely changes the dynamic. It shifts from a fight to an assault, ratcheting up the stakes and the potential for serious harm.
And it gets even worse. Bird flees the scene,
Okay.
but then his brothers arrive,
Oh.
and things spiral completely out of control.
Ah.
Kimberly describes them yelling threats, carrying broken glass, and ultimately dragging Marcus out of the house.
This is where the concept of group mentality comes into play. Individuals in a group can sometimes act in ways they wouldn't if they were alone, feeding off each other's energy and escalating the violence.
Right.
It's like a mob mentality where rational thinking gets lost in the frenzy.
So it's not just about individual responsibility.
No.
It's about the influence of the group dynamic.
Right.
It makes you wonder what the relationships were like between these men before this incident.
Yeah.
Were there pre-existing tensions or rivalries that might have fueled this aggression?
That's a key question.
Yeah.
Understanding the social dynamics within this community is crucial to unpacking this event. Were there underlying conflicts, power struggles, or unresolved issues that might have contributed to the violence? We need to delve deeper into the social fabric to understand how these relationships played a role.
Kimberly then describes Marcus's brothers arriving, everyone scattering, and the police showing up. It's pure chaos.
Well,
And then we get this devastating detail.
yeah,
Marcus is rushed to the hospital in critical condition.
this is where we see the ripple effects of violence start to spread. It's not just about the immediate victims. It's about the families, the friends, the entire community left to grapple with the trauma and the aftermath.
It's heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
Kimberly's account of the days leading up to Marcus's death is filled with anguish. She talks about visiting him at the hospital, seeing him in a coma, his organs failing. It's just gut-wrenching.
This raw emotional account gives us a glimpse into the human toll of violence.
Right.
We're not just talking about statistics or legal proceedings. We're talking about a life cut short, a family shattered, a community forever scarred.
Before we move on to that,
Okay,
let's take a step back
sure.
and examine this interview a little more closely.
Okay.
The interviewer's style is quite direct, even confrontational at times.
Yeah.
How do you think his presence might have shaped Kimberly's account?
The interviewer definitely takes a proactive approach, pushing Kimberly for specific details and sometimes offering his own interpretations. It's important to recognize that in any interview, there's a power dynamic at play.
Right.
The interviewer's questions, tone, and even body language can subtly influence the interviewee's responses.
He even tells Kimberly, "You're now a widow with a 5-year-old child," which feels incredibly intrusive, especially given the rawness of her grief.
It's a delicate balance. While his directness might elicit honest and unfiltered responses, we also have to consider how his presence might have shaped Kimberly's narrative, consciously or unconsciously.
That's a good point. It reminds us that we're always dealing with multiple layers of interpretation, especially when dealing with such a personal and traumatic event.
Yeah.
We're getting Kimberly's perspective filtered through the lens of the interviewer and, of course, our own interpretations as listeners.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of critical listening and recognizing that even firsthand accounts are subjective and shaped by a multitude of factors. Yeah. As we continue to unpack this complex event, it's important to remember that Kimberly's account, while powerful, is just one perspective.
That's right.
Yeah.
While we can empathize with her grief and anger, we also need to consider the context and motivations of everyone involved.
Right.
We can't just assume we have the whole picture.
Exactly. And one of the things that struck me about Kimberly's interview was her description of Bird as Marcus's best friend. This raises a lot of questions, especially given how their argument escalated into such a violent confrontation.
It's almost paradoxical. You wouldn't expect a fight between best friends to turn deadly.
Well, friendships, especially in close-knit communities, can be incredibly complex. There might be a history of unresolved conflicts, power imbalances, or even unspoken resentments that simmer beneath the surface of a seemingly strong bond.
So the best friend label might be more complicated than it appears at first glance.
It's possible,
Yeah.
and it's something investigators would need to delve into to truly understand the dynamics at play.
We also need to revisit the role of alcohol and drugs.
Right.
Kimberly mentions Bird being drunk and possibly having taken pills. If he was intoxicated,
Yeah.
could that have influenced his behavior?
Absolutely. Alcohol is a well-documented factor in aggressive behavior. It can impair judgment, reduce inhibitions, and increase impulsivity, making individuals more likely to engage in violence.
So even if the initial argument seemed trivial, alcohol could have magnified the situation and made it harder for Bird to control his actions.
Exactly. And when you add the potential influence of other substances, it becomes even more difficult to predict how an individual might react in a stressful situation.
Kimberly also provides some fascinating insights into the community dynamics at play.
Yeah.
She mentions that Bird's brothers lived nearby and quickly came to his aid, further escalating the situation.
Right.
This suggests a strong sense of loyalty, but also perhaps a tendency toward a pack mentality.
That's a crucial observation. The way people respond to conflict is often influenced by the norms and expectations of their social group.
Right.
In some communities, there might be a strong emphasis on loyalty and protecting one's own, even if it means resorting to violence.
So this incident might not just be about individual action,
No.
but about deeper social structures and codes of conduct that condone or even encourage violence as a way to resolve disputes.
Precisely. It highlights the importance of understanding the cultural context in which these events occur. What might be considered acceptable behavior in one community might be completely unacceptable in another.
This case really underscores the complexity of assigning responsibility and seeking justice. While Bird was the one who initially stabbed Marcus, his brothers joined in the attack. And Kimberly even mentions them beating him with cut glass.
That's right.
Yeah.
When multiple individuals participate in a violent act,
I saw
determining
Bird
individual
brothers and them
culpability.
calling me, killing him now, right?
Legally, there's a
Because when I'm
concept called
killing-
joint enterprise, which essentially means that if individuals act together to commit a crime, they can all be held responsible for the consequences, even if they didn't all directly participate in every aspect of the crime.
So even if only one person delivered the fatal blow,
Right.
others who participated in the attack could still be held accountable?
Exactly. Prosecutors would need to carefully examine the actions of each individual, their level of involvement, and their intent to determine the appropriate charges.
And of course, there's the question of justice for Marcus and his family.
Yeah.
Kimberly clearly wants to see Bird and his brothers held accountable. What legal avenues might be available to her and Marcus's family in this situation?
In a case like this, there are few potential legal paths. They could pursue a wrongful death lawsuit, which is a civil action seeking financial compensation for the loss of a loved one.
So that wouldn't necessarily lead to jail time for the perpetrators,
Right.
but it could provide some financial recourse for the family.
Exactly. It's a way to hold the individuals responsible for their actions in a financial sense. Additionally, the family could advocate for criminal charges to be brought against Bird and his brothers.
That would involve the state pressing charges
Right.
and seeking criminal penalties, potentially including prison time.
Right. The success of either of these legal avenues would depend on a number of factors, including the strength of the evidence, the willingness of witnesses to cooperate, and the applicable laws in San Juan.
It's a complicated process,
Yeah.
and there's no guarantee of a specific outcome.
That's right. And we also have to consider the emotional toll on Kimberly and Marcus's family as they navigate this complex legal system.
Absolutely. Kimberly is already dealing with immense grief and trauma. Now she's also faced with the daunting task of seeking justice for Marcus. What kind of support systems are in place for victims of violence as they try to rebuild their lives and cope with these challenges?
That's a crucial question, and unfortunately the answer often varies widely depending on the community and the resources available. Ideally, victims of violence should have access to a range of support services, including counseling, therapy, support groups, legal aid, financial assistance, and advocacy organizations that can help them navigate the legal system and access the resources they need.
It sounds like a whole network of support is needed to help victims and their families heal and rebuild their lives after such a traumatic event.
You're absolutely right. And it's important to remember that the impact of violence extends far beyond the immediate victim.
Yeah.
It ripples outward, affecting families, friends, and entire communities.
It's like a stone thrown into a pond, creating waves that spread far and wide.
Exactly. And the healing process can be long and difficult, requiring support, understanding, and a commitment to addressing the root causes of violence.
Kimberly's story has brought to light so many important issues: substance abuse, community dynamics, individual responsibility, the pursuit of justice, and the need for comprehensive support systems.
It's been a heavy conversation, but an important one. And I think in this final part, we need to shift gears a bit. We've delved into the tragedy, the unanswered questions, the complexities of the situation, but what can we learn from this?
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the details of the case, but ultimately we want to use this deep dive to understand how we might prevent similar tragedies in the future. So let's talk solutions. If we want to address violence in communities like the one we're discussing, where do we even begin?
It has to start with open and honest dialogue. We need to create spaces where community members feel safe, sharing their experiences, their fears, their ideas. This means breaking down the stigma surrounding violence and encouraging people to speak out about what they're seeing and experiencing.
It can't be something that's swept under the rug or whispered about in hushed tones. It needs to be brought out into the open.
Exactly. And it's not just about talking, it's about listening. Really hearing the perspectives of those who have been directly affected by violence, understanding their needs, and working collaboratively to find solutions.
That makes sense. But talking and listening are just the first steps. What are some concrete actions communities can take to create real change?
One crucial step is investing in early intervention and prevention programs. This could include conflict resolution training for youth, mentorship programs that provide positive role models, or anger management workshops that equip individuals with the tools to handle conflict constructively.
I love those ideas. It's about giving people the skills to navigate difficult situations before they escalate into violence.
And we can't forget the role of law enforcement. It's crucial to build trust between police officers and the communities they serve. This requires transparency, accountability, and a commitment to addressing issues of bias and excessive force.
That's such an important point. It's about moving away from an us versus them mentality and fostering a sense of shared responsibility for safety and well-being.
Absolutely. We need law enforcement officers who are seen as partners and protectors, not as threats or antagonists.
We've also talked a lot about the role of substance abuse in this case. What can communities do to address addiction and prevent it from contributing to violence?
Providing access to treatment, counseling, and support services is essential. We need to move away from criminalizing addiction and towards treating it as a public health issue that requires compassion and comprehensive care.
It's about recognizing that addiction is a complex disease that affects individuals, families, and communities, and that recovery is possible with the right support.
Exactly, and prevention is key. We need to educate young people about the dangers of substance abuse, address the underlying factors that contribute to addiction, and create communities that offer healthy alternatives and support systems.
This deep dive has made it clear that preventing violence requires a multifaceted approach. It's not about finding one magic solution, but about tackling the issue from multiple angles.
You're absolutely right. It's about individuals taking responsibility for their actions, families providing support and guidance, communities fostering safe and inclusive environments, law enforcement working collaboratively with residents, and the justice system holding perpetrators accountable while also offering opportunities for rehabilitation.
It's a complex web, but I think Kimberly's story has given us a starting point. It's forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the prevalence of violence and the factors that contribute to it. But it's also given us a roadmap for change.
I hope so. We can't bring Marcus back, but we can honor his memory by working to create a world where tragedies like this become less and less frequent.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a call to action. Take what you've learned today and apply it to your own community. Get involved. Speak out against violence. Advocate for change. Support organizations working to prevent violence and help victims.
Even small actions can make a difference. Have those difficult conversations. Educate yourself about the issues. Reach out to someone who might be struggling. Volunteer your time or resources to a local organization.
Together, we can build a world where every community is safe, just, and equitable.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a topic that matters. Until then, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.